Is global warming real? Is climate change irreversible? Why are carbon emissions still rising? Join host Dr. Alberto Troccoli, a global leader in climate science and its application to the energy sector, as he unpacks these pressing issues. Through candid conversations with leading experts, get ready to demystify climate change and explore its many layers. So, let's Climunicate!
Hello, I'm Alberto Troccoli, and welcome to the Let's Climunicate podcast. In this episode, our guest is Dr. Judith Curry, Professor Emeritus at Georgia Tech University in the US and President of the Climate Forecast Application Network. I hope you enjoy our conversation. It's a great pleasure to have you here at our podcast, Let's Climunicate. I've been...
Well, thank you for inviting me.
That's a real pleasure. And I've been wanting to talk with you for quite a while, and I know also you're working now on climate forecasting. So you have CFAN, Climate Forecast Applications Network. You're a president of it, but obviously you have a rich career before that with Georgia Tech, Professor Georgia Tech, and many other important institutions. So I'd like to hear a bit about your experience, maybe some highlights of your career during the academic experience, but also especially maybe focus on your recent experience at CFAN, also because you may not know, but we're actually probably kind of competitors on different grounds because we are acting on different geographies. I work mostly in Europe and Africa, and probably you more in the US. So be good to know more about CFAN also, please.
Okay. Well, I got my PhD in 1982 from the University of Chicago, and I spent some decades in academia. I was faculty member in the U.S., Purdue University, Penn State University, University of Colorado, and finally at Georgia Tech. I retired from Georgia Tech in 2017, and I'm now a professor emerita. I guess my academic career took a big switch or a big flip around 2009, 2010. And this was, in many ways, motivated by the Climategate Scandal. If you're familiar with this was the hacking of the University of East Anglia emails from some IPCC authors. And I was really rather appalled at the kind of behavior that I saw reflected in those emails. And I started speaking out, saying, we need to do better. We need to make our data publicly available. We need to be more transparent. We need to be open and honest about uncertainty and avoid being overconfident in our conclusions. And we also need to stop demonizing anyone who disagrees with the establishment, if you will. And, I thought these were motherhood and apple pie statements, but there was a big backlash from the important people in the climate community who felt that I had committed heresy by criticizing, not by name and in a soft way, just say we need to do better. But then I became sort of the Antichrist, and I became, public enemy number one, amongst the activist people in the climate community, because they felt that I had the potential to do a lot of damage to their cause. Why these scientists have a cause, that's a whole different issue. I was trying to protect the, integrity of the scientific process, but they had a different agenda. And, things became so intolerable that, I started charting a path to leave academia. And like I said, I retired my position in 2017 and went full-time with my company, Climate Forecast Applications Network. We had started the company in 2006, and this was launched under the Georgia Tech sort of incubator program. And, we maintained it at a low key. We had a couple of high-profile, long-standing clients that sort of, kept us afloat. But once I resigned my faculty position, I said, well, I'm going to do this full time and, see where we can go with it. So my company is a weather and climate services company. We operate both on the weather timescales and the climate timescales. And the sort of the main theme of what we do is focus on extreme weather events, probabilistic forecasting of extreme weather events. And we really are pushing the envelope in terms of, prediction and predictability in an ensemble framework. We were recently awarded a pretty good size grant from the U.S. NOAA agency to apply artificial intelligence to extreme weather modules in the context of an ensemble forecasting environment. So, we work with a range of clients. The two biggest sectors that we operate in are the insurance sector and the energy sector, broadly defined. This includes electric utilities, energy trading firms, renewable energy producers, and petroleum companies. Also work with some niche agricultural topics related to precision agriculture, and also a variety of applications in the climate space. So we're a small company, but we've been around for a while, and we do some pretty interesting things, I think.
That's wonderful, and I maybe we can have an opportunity to discuss about that in a separate meeting, because I think that's pretty much what we do, and it's great that the area of climate applications is growing as far as I can see. I mean, there's always more to do and not enough time. But yeah, we'll talk also about the Climategate you mentioned and other things during the interview. And I want to start, though, just by telling a bit about our podcast, Let's Climunicate. And the reason why we set it up, it's basically because there is such polarization also, as you mentioned, in the climate debate. And it's such an important debate that I think, we need to talk about across the spectrum, from people who think that nothing is happening and actually, having more CO2 in the atmosphere is better, to people that think that there's not going to be a tomorrow. So, because it's such an important point, and although, we also know that we must acknowledge that the majority of scientists also agree that there is an issue, it's important to talk with everybody, because it's a topic that it's of concern of humanity. So I think it's so important not to discuss it broadly. So that's basically the reason why we're running this podcast. And before we jump into the actual interview questions, I've got a few quickfire questions for you, just very, very quick, if you may, and feel free to pass if you don't feel like responding to them. So the first one is really just to set the scene. So can you give an estimate of how much the temperature has changed in the last 150 years? Just a rough estimate of global temperature.
About 1.2 degrees centigrade.
That's great. And how much of this do you estimate to be related to human-induced greenhouse gas emissions?
Well, we don't really know. And the other issue is sulfate and aerosol that aren't directly accounted for in context of greenhouse gases. So we don't really know it, because we've been so focused only at looking at the CO2 part of the story that we haven't paid sufficient attention to natural climate variability, to land use, to aerosols. So there's a whole lot of things that are also important that we haven't been paying very much attention to. So we don't have, in my opinion, great confidence in statements about how much is caused by CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions versus other causes.
Okay, maybe we'll go a bit deeper in this topic later. Just for now, it's really just to have a quick sense of where we stand on this issues. So the next question is, what's your estimate for the temperature in the next, let's say, 50, 70 years? How much will it change, do you think, the global temperature again?
Well, a lot of it depends on natural climate variability. We don't know how to predict that. I mean, we could have huge volcanic eruptions like we saw in the early 1800s. A lot of things that could happen. If we're just talking about CO2, which I think is a mistake to just talk about CO2, my take on the climate sensitivity is on the low end of the spectrum, around 2 degrees centigrade per doubling of carbon dioxide. So, but I think there's a whole lot of other things going on in the climate, multi-decadal internal variability, solar indirect effects, all sorts of issues that aren't accounted for in the CMIP-6 simulations that are cited by the IPCC. Those are just basically big sensitivity experiments to CO2 concentration. They don't really tell us all that much about how the climate works or how the climate might evolve.
Okay, and last quick question is, could you give an estimate of the risk, like a percentage number, of the climate hitting one of the major tipping points that have been highlighted by IPCC or many other studies, like the shutdown of the thermohaline circulation of the West Antarctic ice sheets? And
very low likelihood. However, I wrote a whole book called Climate Uncertainty and Risk. It was published 2023, and I lay out a whole framework for how we should think about these issues. And one of the big sins that I would say that we've committed is that we've oversimplified both the problem and its solutions. So trying to come up with simple numbers about when there's deep uncertainty involved, to my mind, isn't very useful.
Yeah, certainly I agree with you on this. I mean, it's certainly not an easy problem. Absolutely. This is, like I said, there was just an initial quickfire question just to see. So you were saying it's a low likelihood, a low risk. So maybe under 10% or something.
Yeah. We don't have enough knowledge to.
Okay, so you don't feel.
Percentage on it. But if we do reach any of those tipping points, it's far more likely to be caused by natural climate variability than it is to be caused by CO2 emissions.
Okay, so let's dive deeper now into some of these points. And I would like to start with one of your statements. I've heard you talk several times about the fact that the policy cart has been put in front of the scientific horses back in the late 80s with the first IPCC and so on. And sorry, I haven't read your book, but I have followed a lot of your podcast and presentations. So I think I have a very good sense of what the book is about. And I'm referring especially one of your lectures that you gave, and which I believe was strongly based on your book. So I'm drawing mostly from that lecture, and so this also is a statement you made that during that lecture. Uh-huh. So I mean, we can agree that there's been a strong debate starting in the late 80s, but I'd like you to reflect also perhaps on what happened before. I mean, are we disregarding some of the what happened in terms of this scientific discoveries since 1950s with the Eunice, Newton, Freud, when they discovered that the CO2 or greenhouse gases were affecting the temperature, and then Arrhenius. So that was more than 150 years ago. And then the history about what Exxon found out in the late 60s. So it was 20 years before, which is that they found out that there is a connection between the emissions and the climate change, particularly temperature change, and really this is basic physics, isn't it? I mean, it's not. We didn't have to wait until the late 80s to know that there was this connection.
Okay, the issue is this. We've known about the so-called greenhouse effect for more than 150 years. We understand the basic physics of the CO2's infrared emission spectra. We've known that for a very long time. But that doesn't tell us anything about the most consequential issues, like the sensitivity of the climate to CO2 emissions. Even, there's still a factor of 3 uncertainty in this most basic parameter, even according to the IPCC. So this is not driven by science. This is driven by, starting in the 50s, the United Nations, the Rockefeller Brothers Foundations, a number of different organizations, had this neo-Malthusian perspective on the world. They were anti-capitalist. The population was too large. And they thought the only way we can solve these problems is some sort of world government through the UN. And they saw environmental issues as the perfect vehicle to push these ideas, and specifically climate change. Once they got a cadre of, top climate scientists to support this and push this with them. And then it started taking off in the 1980s. So right from the very beginning, this was driven by a specific worldview and a policy agenda. And I hate to say it, but some leading scientists became useful idiots for this agenda. And, when the IPCC was formed, its mandate was to look only at dangerous human-caused climate change, not to look at natural variability, not to look at any benefits from CO2, not to look at any benefits from warming, but only to look at dangerous human-caused climate change. So it's a very specific political agenda that has framed this issue for many decades now. And this is a framework, and the national governments have chimed in. All the funding in this area goes to support research that supports this particular agenda. And, people who are talking about natural climate variability, the sun, land use, all these kind of things are very much marginalized. And if you talk too much about uncertainty or natural variability, you just get called a denier. And that's the sad state of affairs that we find ourselves in. Science has been thrown under the bus for this political agenda and for the self-aggrandizement and careerism of certain climate scientists who become activists. So to me, that's a very bad situation for science. And people who are seriously trying to understand and manage climate risk are just left with a bunch of garbage because we're not asking the right questions. We're not focused on the right things. So it's a bad state of affairs. And like I said, I wrote my book, Climate Uncertainty and Risk, to try to lay all this out and to try to map out a way forward that makes sense in terms of supporting human flourishing while at the same time supporting environmental objectives.
Okay, thank you. I think that clarifies pretty well your point of view, and I appreciate very much your book and the discussions that arisen from that book. And like I said, that there's been so many interviews and so on that have been very, very useful and very interesting. However, we also need to balance it with a lot of other literature, as you would appreciate. Starting from the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change reports. They may be flawed in some way, as people say, but ultimately this is a collection of all the knowledge of what we.
What my book does is say, people disagree. There's a great deal of uncertainty, and people disagree. There's a broad spectrum. Okay, we don't need to say this person is right, that person's wrong. We need to use that as information, that there's disagreement and there's uncertainty as part of the information in our risk assessment and risk management strategies. So we don't have to, I'm not saying my take on the science is right. Okay, I don't assert is right. What I do assert is that the only way that we can sensibly deal with this in a policy perspective, it's a wicked problem about a deeply complex system is to apply the principles of 21st century risk science to assessing and managing this problem, rather than militant consensus enforcement and the precautionary principle. That is just a wrong fit for this problem.
Yeah, like I said, I fully agree with you that it's a very complex problem. But if we also look at the history of the discussions, I think there are many discussions, but I like to focus for now just mostly on the IPCC and particularly the COPs, the conferences of parties. And as you may know, there are tens of thousands of people who participate in the discussions, and they've been going on for nearly 30 years now. We had the 28th COP last year, so it's a very long process. And if it was indeed a simplistic solution, as I think I heard you say, it wouldn't have taken so long to get to where we are. And actually, we are not there yet, because there is...
They have a solution, net zero. The problem is it's politically, technologically, and economically infeasible. So it's something that doesn't make sense, but they keep pushing it for decades. So it's just they're doing something that makes no sense.
Okay, we'll dive deeper into this, but I'd like to go back. If we can, back to just follow the steps of the science. So I heard you say that there's no consensus on what the greenhouse gases are affecting, how in the way they're affecting the global temperature. So there's already like 1.2 degrees, like you said as well, already happened in the last 150 years. And we know that most of it is to do with greenhouse gases. Like we know it from the reports. I mean, that's basic physics, and
we don't know it.
And
we don't know
sorry,
it. That's an assertion. It's not knowledge. It's an assertion by the IPCC. It's not what I would call well-justified science, because they've neglected important parts of natural variability, and they've neglected important parts of human impacts on the landscape and climate. So it's an assertion. I don't, just some scientists appointed by government agencies who vote in a room and declare a consensus to make sure that they keep getting funding, and to make sure that they please the politicians, to make sure that they advance their careers. I mean, that's not justification to me. The scientific justification for those assertions, in my mind, is weak, because they've neglected too many things about the natural climate system.
Okay, so I mean, if we are going to explain it in other ways, well, first of all, there is a clear correlation between the increase in carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and temperature. So that's
no, that it's not that simple. If you go back longer in time, you don't see, in paleoclimate, you don't see a simple correlation. Also, the modern temperature increase started around 1850, 1860, after we were coming out of a little ice age. And CO2 emissions at the time were very weak. In fact, there was a great deal of warming in the early part of the 20th century that CO2 emissions had very little impact on. So until that is, you can't explain that with CO2 emissions. So there's a whole lot of things that are not easily explained by CO2 emissions as the climate control knob.
Okay, I was trying to focus on the last 100 years. I know that if you go back, the record also becomes patchy with the reconstructions of temperature and greenhouse gases and so on. But if I'm aware that the record is not that long over the last 150 years, but there's been experiments done. The best science that can be done is to take the current models and try to see what the response is. If you add one factor, the other remove, and you will know that this has been tried, and the response is basically that. The response is that there's the main driver is greenhouse gases.
Yeah. Well, you get that from models that are not fit for purpose to make that assessment. They don't get the amplitude or the phasing of the multi-decadal and longer scale internal climate variability. They don't include indirect solar effects and so forth and so on. So if you leave out a bunch of stuff, yeah, you can make it look like it's CO2.
Okay, but that's like I said, this is the best that we have at the moment. Of course, everything.
I know. So we just say we can say it's deeply uncertain and we don't know. Okay, that's a much better epistemological basis for talking about climate change than trying to manufacture a consensus around the best that we can do right now as if this is a highly certain scientific finding. It's weakly justified, in my opinion.
Well, it's not just the best we can do. Like I said, this is it's a fundamental physics, the relationship between greenhouse gases and temperature. So we can argue about.
But there's a factor of 3 uncertainty in the value of the equilibrium climate sensitivity, and these models do not correctly include natural internal variability and solar indirect effects. People, way back when they said, oh, well, the magnitude of the warming is going to be so huge that we can forget about natural variability. Well, sure, if you adopt the extreme emissions scenarios, the so-called 8.5 scenarios, which gives you 4 or 5 degrees centigrade warming by 2100. But those scenarios have been rejected by energy economists and even by the Conference of the Parties ever since 2021. They're now using the medium emissions scenario, the 4.5 scenario, as the baseline. And current emissions and nationally intended contributions are even coming in below the 4.5 scenario. Nevertheless, the IPCC and climate scientists keep emphasizing the extreme 8.5 scenario because this is how they get dramatic results, how they get attention in the media, and all sorts of reasons. But even the UN climate negotiators have dropped those extreme emission scenarios. And once you drop those extreme emission scenarios, then the magnitude of the components of natural climate variability become very comparable to what we're talking about in terms of CO2-driven warming. So there's, this really bad logic that has gone on here. Like I said, is very weakly justified.
Okay, so the weakly justified. I think it's a debatable, but I don't really want to debate the point. I would just like to hear your opinion here, but I also want to bring some facts. And just to add another element is, already Arrhenius tried the experiment of doubling CO2 more than 100 years ago, and he didn't have any climate models or anything, and he came up with about 4 degrees, if I remember correctly, sensitivity basically. And that's in the right ballpark. But this is just to say that you just need fundamental physics to see how that affects. Of course, there are many other factors, and I accept the fact. I accept the fact that. Sorry, just to conclude, I accept the fact that there's been also maybe an overhype of the highest emission scenarios, like you said, the 8.5 and so on. But the same is true also for the International Energy Agency projections. They've been doing that for many, many years, and they also were criticized about some years ago, 10 years ago, that they were using such a dramatic scenarios that were not going to happen. But their justification was to just show what would be the situation in that it's a kind of scenario, and they're all engineers. I mean, they're engineers, they are economists, so they're not really scientists. They are trying to see how the system could look like in 50 years or so. So based on the science and the physics. Yes.
No, it's not science and physics because even the most basic thing, the equilibrium climate sensitivity to a doubling of CO2, I mean, the direct forcing from CO2 is quite small. In order to get big numbers, even to get to 2, and certainly to 3 or 4, you have to have feedbacks, positive feedbacks. And this is where the great deal of uncertainty is. And there's no physics. You can wave your arms and talk about, storylines about how this generally works. But especially with regards to cloud feedback, people disagree on even the sign of it, let alone the magnitude. So there's a great deal of uncertainty, and it's not simple physics that gives you the answer here. Great deal of complexity, a great deal that we don't know.
Of course, the details of interannual variability, the internal variability are really, really complex. We know that. That's why there are so many people working in climate, and they will continue to work for many years to come, I think. But what we are looking at here is the general trend, and that's what we are able to discern from. But if you look at focusing on the variability, something that you're very familiar with. So the ENSO cycle, the El Nino and Southern Oscillations, which is the largest cycle after the seasons. If you look at the impact on global temperature in the last 30, 50 years, it's smaller than what we see in the trend. So how can you explain the...
It's the multi-decadal to millennial scale. Okay. Oscillations and variability that matters. When you're talking about, the history, we're talking about warming since 1950 to 1924, 75 years ago. That's basically, the same period as the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation, the Pacific decadal oscillation. There are much longer oscillations in play also. Also, we've had a millennial scale solar maximum in the late 20th century that's been downplayed. All sorts of things have gone on that haven't been properly accounted for. So just saying, well, El Nino and La Nina, that all averages out. Well, to some extent it does. But when you're talking about like multi-decadal to century scales, like what's going to happen in 50 years or what's going to happen by 2100, well, then these multi-decadal internal variability becomes a very important component. And, the solar variability does as well. So, and this is all neglected, just saying it's all about CO2. I mean, the big spike in temperature that we've seen in the last few years, where did that come from? It's not CO2. I mean, we've had the Hunga Tonga eruption. We've had, since 2015, cloudiness is decreasing, and most of the warming has been driven by solar radiation, not by CO2 warming. CO2 is lost in the noise. So cloud variability is a huge driver on the climate. And, there's all these things going on, and then people say, well, it's just basic physics. CO2 equals an increase in temperature. But there is all this other stuff going on that a lot of people don't pay any attention to, and it's not a simple story. And until we get serious and try to untangle the natural variability as well as the other human-caused things, including aerosols and land use, we're not going to sort this out in a sensible way, just by thinking that CO2 is the control knob here.
Okay, so that's a good overview of the situation in terms of complexity. And like I said, I fully accept the complexity of the system. And nonetheless, there is still that spike also, not just in the temperature. The temperature has increased, regularly over the past 20, 30 years and longer, but in the last 30 years kind of accelerated. But there's obviously the sign of the emissions as well. The emissions are much higher than they've been in the last 800,000 years ago. So I mean, the point is that it's the points you raised are all very important, and it'd be very good to see these points raised also in the scientific literature, in the scientific debate, and so on. and maybe brought into the discussion of IPCC. I mean, why not include it in that conversation? And they shouldn't be relegated to discussions on podcasts like this. It should really be part of the broader conversation.
Oh, I agree. It should be. I mean, and in all honesty, the working group 1 of the IPCC AR6 assessment took some baby steps in this direction, which, I think is good, but there's still a ways to go. I mean, for them to catch up and go to a sensible place. And the first thing they need to do is lose the extreme emission scenarios. And once they do that, and then they realize that the natural climate variability is really a factor to be reckoned with. So, it's this simple decision model that has forced all this precautionary principle, and that the IPCC needs to provide, sufficient evidence to trigger the precautionary principle, with the precaution being net zero. And so we had to manufacture this consensus to give the policymakers enough confidence to proceed. Well, that's a totally wrong decision model for a deeply complex, wicked problem like climate change. And in my book, I talk about, robust risk management procedures, decision-making under deep uncertainty, all these things that you can do that make sense when you're facing a problem where there's a great deal of uncertainty and disagreement, not just on the science side of things, but also on societal values in terms of what people want done. And there are some regions, stand to win, in a warmer climate, and other regions stand to suffer in a warmer climate. And all this complexity is just completely ignored in the sort of net zero framework with its deadlines and targets that have really become disconnected from anything that relates to the climate, frankly. Even if we were to successfully reach net zero by 2035 or whatever, we wouldn't notice any difference in the climate probably until the 22nd century. Even the IPCC acknowledges there's very little relationship between extreme weather events and warming, apart from heat waves. So you're not going to see it. And we're going to upend the world's energy infrastructure, prevent Africa from reaching its energy and economic goals. And we're going to make ourselves more vulnerable to extreme weather, all because we think we can prevent bad weather by eliminating CO2 emissions. I mean, it's insanity. It's like tulip mania. It's like pagans sacrificing virgins or whatever. It just makes no sense.
Okay, so again, you touched on many points that would warrant a long discussion. But let's see, try to pick a few key issues. So, you mentioned net zero. Of course, that's a strong international policy now. Net zero is reducing emissions and getting to zero effective emissions by 2050. You mentioned 2035, probably that's beyond easy. But the target is trying to put at 2050, whether it's reachable or not, it's a different matter. But at least there is the target. But the important point, again, like I mentioned before, this is coming out of a long-term discussion of over 30 years with all the conferences of parties, and particularly with the Paris Agreement in 2015 and last year in the United Arab Emirates, where if you remember, the COP28 was chaired by the CEO of an oil company. So it's not that the conversation is led by environmentalists and scientists and so on. There's a full conversation with the society, with energy companies, and much broader than that.
Okay, well, simply put, the UNFCCC, the COP, they've shot themselves in the foot over this issue. If their goal is a cleaner environment and cleaner sources of power, the fact that we urgently have to go to net zero. And they say, well, the only solution, because the technologies are right there and we can do this quickly, is wind and solar, which are very, very suboptimal solutions. And, oh, well, we can't do nuclear. We don't have time to do advanced geothermal and all this other stuff. So we're, doing this whole-scale implementation of wind and solar, which aren't reducing any emissions, because right now we need so much more energy, and we need natural gas for backup, and on it goes. So this isn't really getting us anywhere. So if we had dropped, let's say there was no climate change issue, I think in the 21st century there would have been a natural drive for an energy transition. Okay, fossil fuels, there's drawbacks to fossil fuels, and they're going to get harder and harder to extract as time goes on. There'd be a natural progression away from fossil fuels. More abundant, cheaper would be the main drivers, but yeah, let's make it clean while we're at it. And I think there would have been a natural transition over the course of the 21st century. So what we've done is we've sort of perverted that natural progression by mandating wind and solar and ignoring the potential of nuclear power, advanced geothermal, and whatever else might come down the pipe, because it would take too long and we couldn't meet our artificially imposed deadlines. So, we've shot ourselves in the foot on this one.
I'm not entirely sure what you actually mean by shot on the foot. I know you explained you explained the fact that you think that wind and solar are not suitable and that we should use nuclear and so on. But I just like to point out that probably you heard the latest data that we are likely going to hit the peak emissions probably this year or maybe in the next few years. In the meantime, wind, solar, renewables in general, electricity are providing more than 30% of electricity worldwide, and they are used simply because
we're still at 80% fossil fuels. We're still at 80% fossil fuels. Yeah. Yes, we are adding more wind and solar, but at the end of the day, we're still at 80% fossil fuels.
Okay, so the 80%, just to clarify, sorry, because I work also in this area of energy, and 80% is the actual, the primary energy. So it's not just electricity. What I was referring to is 30% electricity, because basically wind and solar can only offset electricity, not the rest of the energy. So it's growing, but you also need to remember that this increase is happening in the backdrop of increasing demand. So it's a moving target. You increase the supply, but the demand is also increasing. And there's going to be much more demand also projected because of AI, because of all the other requirements. The population will need more electricity, and so on. So this is happening. But the reason why it's happening, I'd like to just remark on this and then see what you think. But the reason it's happening is really mainly is cost, because solar power has decreased so much in the last 10, 15 years, because it's at least 5 times cheaper than nuclear now to implement. So it's a matter of cost mainly.
No, once you factor in, if you try to get above 30% or so, you run into asynchronicity issues, and you need to do all sorts of expensive upgrades to the transmission grid. Again, South Australia may be the farthest along this path to try to do the whole thing from solar and wind. And oh my gosh, the technological problems that they're running into are huge. They have blackouts. The only thing that's saving their bacon is coal-produced electricity from Victoria, which they import when they need it. So, you run up against a wall very quickly because you destabilize the grid so much with this intermittent asynchronous electricity that it causes a lot of problems. Now, I don't get it. In Europe, you have high population density, Where are you going to put all these wind turbines and solar farms? Even in the U.S., where we have much lower population densities, there are huge permitting problems. People not in my backyard. On and on it goes. The environmental activists are even, pushing against it for environmental and habitat reasons. This is not. It's a huge land use issue, and beyond a certain footprint, people at least in the U.S., aren't going to buy it. And I can't believe that in Europe, where you have so much higher population density, that people are going to buy it.
Well, as a matter of fact, even in Germany, which is talked a lot about, they've reached already peaks of 100% renewables on a few occasions. So they're running on 40% as an average over a year. So there is already very high percentage. There is also, a lot of expansion on offshore wind, for example. But I'm just stating facts. I'm not saying these are the solutions. I'm just showing that things can happen. There is, if you want to take other examples, there's Uruguay, which is running at 98% renewables, including obviously hydropower.
Well, yeah, because they have hydropower. Because they have hydropower, you can do it. But if you don't have hydropower, you can't.
No, but hydropower is in small places, in most places. And also regarding the space issue, excuse me, the space issue for solar, you may know that in order to power the entire world with the current demand, electricity demand, the area needed is about 500,000 kilometers. So it's 400,000 kilometers. So it's like probably, what is it? Less than 1% of 10% of it. So it's a limited area. So it's a small area compared to the whole landmass.
I know. It's an issue of transmission. It's an issue of power loss. It's an issue of storage. So it's very expensive to solve those problems. And you have the asynchronicity issue, which is not easily solved. So, you can do these back of the envelope calculations, but at the end of the day, that's not going to power industrial economies.
Okay, so like I said, the back of the envelope are actually happening in several countries, and there is ingenuity, also innovation, and this is all happening. But leaving that debate aside, so I'd like to hear from you. If not wind and solar, and I understand you probably would like to back nuclear, we drop the net zero target. How are we going to approach? Are we happy to let emissions grow because we feel that there's a very low risk and we run on current consumption, current energy mix, or other kind of emissions?
Well, chapters 12, 13, 14, and 15 in my book explain all that. I don't know that I can do very much in a soundbite in the few minutes that we have left. Okay, but the point is you need to drop the targets, you need to focus on energy abundance, and you need to focus on R&D, constantly, and, let capitalism and let everything compete with each other. No mandates, no targets, just, run with it. Okay, in the U.S., the big data centers and the tech companies, they're taking the lead in building nuclear power plants near their data centers and things like that. And so the need for more electricity is going to drive innovation much faster than these mandates from the UN. And so we're just slowing things down by insisting on wind and solar because it's just not going to work at scale.
Okay. It's always very good to have the research and innovation and then push. But we also probably want to acknowledge the fact that it's also been innovation that has brought not just innovation, but also the learning by doing that has brought the cost of solar, for example, down. That the batteries are also projected to decrease a lot in the next 10 years or so. So it's a lot of learning, innovation happening all the time. So it's not that because there is a target that we said stop innovation.
Well, no, I don't think the target is driving. I don't think the target is driving it. The target is putting an artificial urgency that preferentially supports wind and solar. And I think wind is not a very good solution. I think there's a place for rooftop solar. But what we really need to be going to is advanced nuclear and advanced geothermal and whatever other innovations we might come up with. We need to push forward on this in order to, have the abundance, that the world wants. I mean, the need just from AI and data centers and blockchain and all this stuff is hugely increasing demand, and we're only just at the cusp of seeing this increase. And so wind and solar is not going to deliver on that. So, we need to get real. We need to drop these targets and focus on abundance and cost and innovation. And by 2070, 2100, I think we'll be much farther along on this 21st century energy transition if we drop these silly targets and just let innovation, ingenuity, the learning curves, and all this, run at its own pace.
Very good. I think, we can leave this discussion here. I appreciate very much your points, and I think we'll let the listeners take some key home messages. And if you don't mind, I'd like to go back for closing, to go back to your mention at the beginning about the Climategate, because actually, I don't know if you noticed, I actually worked at the University of East Anglia for a number of years, and also very closely with Phil Jones, who's in the midst of the Climategate. And I know there are strong feelings there with Climategate, but I should also say that I arrived well after this was closed. And I know that it was a big thing for climate, but I also realize, not having been involved, that this has been discussed and at length, and it's been cleared. So I'd just like to take your view on.
Okay, the investigations were all shams. It was very shoddy, unethical behavior by a number of scientists. Okay, there's just no way around it. Okay, and that's just egregious behavior by many of those scientists. Unethical, in my opinion. And, I don't really have anything more to say beyond that. And the things that I said, we need more transparency, we need data publicly available, we need to be more honest about certain uncertainties. I mean, the whole community has come on that bandwagon since Climategate. In terms of treating people who disagree with you respectfully, well, no, that hasn't happened, at least by the activist climate scientists. They still continue to call people like me a denier or whatever. I have no idea what it is that I'm denying, but, it's just very unprofessional behavior. It has damaged not just climate science, but all of science in untold ways. So, I just think the behavior that was revealed by those emails is absolutely egregious, unconscionable, and the fact that those scientists didn't suffer any sanctions is a very poor reflection on our institutions and our field.
Yeah, I don't know about, like I said, I don't know about the details, but I'm really sorry that you feel that you were attacked in that way. And also, I personally also don't like the word denier or skeptical, because as we know, skepticism is part of science. We all know that. But it's like I said at the beginning, I like to talk with people from all parts of the spectrum in this debate. But I just wanted to ask you whether you think that this is a widespread, culture within IPCC. Don't you think that there are actually very well respected scientists also that work in and contribute to IPCC in climate science and all around the world?
Yeah, it's the people at the top. It's the political agenda that underlies the whole thing. And I discuss this at length in my book. I can't summarize it in sound bites in the few minutes we have left, but I deal with this issue at length in my book, Climate Uncertainty and Risk.
Okay, so it looks like this is a closed chapter of your kind of career as a scientist. I mean, do you see you as contributing?
I am extremely active in the private sector.
No, in the private sector, no, but I mean, sorry, I meant in terms of trying to find more about learning more about the impact of the climate variability and emissions on that.
That's what my company does this for our clients. I do a lot of research. I don't publish in refereed journals. Because there's no reason for me to play that game. And it's also my secret sauce. This is what I make money off of. This is what I support my research group on, by having a unique approach, to these issues that clients find of value in their risk management and their decision making. So I am very active in scientific research. And my book with Climate Uncertainty and Risk is quite a bit of original research. It was published by an academic press, underwent rigorous peer review. So, I mean, there's a lot of scholarly, that's my main body of scholarly output in recent years. The other stuff is internal company technical reports and reports to my clients. A lot of it, like I said, I have a big research grant from a U.S. government agency right now to use artificial intelligence to help better predict extreme weather events. So a lot of research that we're doing.
No, I appreciate that, and I really value your contribution to science, and that's why I was asking and to see whether you were also contributing to the wider debate, bringing to the open science some of the. But I can see you're already doing a lot in your company. What I was wondering whether
I'm very active on Twitter at CurryJA. I have a blog, Climate Etc., JudithCurry.com. I haven't been too active on the blog lately. I've just been too busy with other things. So I remain quite active in the public debate and doing research and helping my clients better manage their weather and climate related risk.
That's great. So I think that's a very good place to stop, Judith. And I thank you very much for your time. You're very generous. You've been very generous. And I think we had a very open and useful conversation. I hope you enjoyed that too. And I hope that we can discuss further, like we said, with the topics that we do in the business side, but also in the open science. I'll follow more your discussions on Twitter, and if there is also some more science that is coming out that can contribute to the overall debate on IPCC and so on, that would be fantastic. So thank you very much again, Judith.
Oh, thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to explore our other interviews and subscribe to our channel to receive notifications about future episodes, which we plan to release weekly.